Credit licensing. If you don't register for interim permission with the FCA by the end of March, you better get used to saying sorry. Because without interim permission, you can't legally offer credit from April. Don't be
sorry.
Be registered. Go online and search FCA Clicked. Consumer Credit Licensing. Have you clicked yet?
This is LBC. Call Clegg. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. 0845 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 27th of March, and that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC. And I'm taking your questions, as ever, for the next half an hour, so do get in touch. You can call on 0845 6060 973. You can email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And, of course, you can watch on lbc.co.uk. So let's go straight to the first caller, and that is Mike. Mike in Ealing. Hello, Mike.
Oh, hello, Mr. Clegg.
Hello.
I was interested in the debate last night when you made a very strong point, it appeared, about the population of Romania and Bulgaria. Mm-hmm. I thought I'd trawl the internet to find out what the truth was. The official census in Romania and in Bulgaria goes back to 2011, and it shows 27.5 million between them. So, on the face of it, you've got a good point there. But when you research beyond that to try and get an up-to-date statement, it goes beyond 29 million. So my question to you is, how far did you go in your research to come up with a figure?
Well, I did exactly what you did, which is the census figures on those people who now live in Romania and Bulgaria. That was my point. Look, my point was a simple one, which is immigration is an issue which a lot of people are rightly concerned about. But I just think it's important to have that debate precisely because it's such a difficult one, because it provokes so many anxieties, based on some facts rather than some wild allegations. And to suggest that 29 million Bulgarians, Romanians are going to move into the United Kingdom, or even more, as Nigel Farage then went on to say last night, that over 400 million people come to this country, to put it politely, that is just totally implausible, not least when, as you have just confirmed, there are less than 29 million people, according to official statistics, living in Romania and Bulgaria at the moment. So, yes, let's have the debate about the freedom of movement, by the way, and that freedom of movement is something that 1.5 million Brits enjoy who live elsewhere in the European Union. 2 million people from elsewhere in the European Union have come into our country since 2004. Half of them have gone back home. So, look, there's a lot of people moving around, and we need to think through how we tighten up the rules to make sure there are no abuses. The loopholes are born out. They can't just come here and claim benefits. But the point I was making was a simple one of don't add to the anxieties by scaremongering using suggestions that are simply not going to materialise. The idea that 29 million Romanians and Bulgarians are going to flood Britain is simply not going to happen.
Quick response from you, Mike.
Well, he didn't answer the question, did he? I simply asked him where he got the figure from.
He told you, with respect, he did say...
I did say to you, Mike.
Go ahead, Mr. Clegg.
No, I did say to you, Mike, I've exactly what you yourself have established, which is the official census.
It is over 29 million, as Mr. Farage said.
No, he said in his leaflets, which I was referring to, that 29 million Bulgarians and Romanians might move to the United Kingdom. Given that the official census in those two countries, as you have yourself rightly identified, show that there aren't even 29 million Romanians and Bulgarians presently living in Romania and Bulgaria, it's just it's a fanciful claim to make, which is only designed to scare people. When I think, yes, let's get on top of the issue of immigration, but let's do it in a way which is firm and sensible, not based on wild suggestions that millions and millions and millions of people are going to come to this country who simply are not going to do that.
OK, let's stop trading numbers. Thank you, Mike. Next call, Mr. Clegg.
Yes, Kim in Bristol. Hello, Kim.
Hello, Nick. Well done for last night. I think you actually picked the post on Mr. Farage, but my question for you is, are you going to make use of Nigel Farage's political alignment with Putin when he said that Europe had blood on its hands as Nigel Farage, as Europe provoked him Putin into saying what he said, and that Ukrainians had died as a result of their desire for democracy and closer relations with the EU.
Well, it came right at the end of the debate, so we couldn't debate it further. But I wasn't surprised that Nigel Farage doesn't agree with me. I was extraordinarily surprised, if not shocked, that he agrees with Vladimir Putin. And to somehow suggest that because of Nigel Farage's loathing of the European Union, that is the reason why Ukrainian protesters sought to reclaim their own freedom and their own country on the streets of Kiev. I just think it's really insulting to those people who in Kiev were simply standing up for values that we should share and support of democracy, of autonomy, of them being able to determine their own fate. And for Nigel Farage to side with Vladimir Putin, well, he'll have to explain why he did that. I was astounded he did so.
I know, absolutely awful. And, to think that we should have somebody like him stand on political stages with the likes of you and Ed Miliband and David Cameron, I certainly would not like to see him stand on political forums and debates.
All right, Kim, thank you. Briefly and lastly on this, Deputy Prime Minister, was it naivety then or stupidity from Mr Farage with that remark last night?
You'll need to ask him, and no doubt it'll come up in the debate next week. But my view is that it shows quite how extreme people can be, like Nigel Farage, when their loathing of the European Union becomes so all-consuming that they even end up siding with Vladimir Putin in order to make their point. And to suggest that somehow it's the European Union's fault that the Ukrainian people rose up, as many did on the streets of Kiev, against their government, seeking to claim greater democracy, greater freedom, I just think is such a perverse way of looking at things. And I personally, think that what Vladimir Putin has done and what the Russians have done, in effect annexing another country in the heart of Europe, or part of another country, is simply unacceptable in this day and age. And of course, the only reason we're able to seek to exert any influence, and it's difficult enough as it is, on Vladimir Putin is because we can act with the clout of being part of the economic superpower that is the European Union, upon which, of course, Russia depends a lot. So, look, this, as on so many other issues, I see very, very differently to Nigel Farage, but it was in many ways the most striking, if not shocking, new kind of revelation that came to light in yesterday's debate.
Kim, the caller there, Mr Clegg, calls it for you. I have to say, LBC poll called it against you, 67% plays 33, and YouGov for the Sun called it 57% for Farage, 36% for Nick Clegg. Did you lose last night?
Oh, well, clearly a lot of people didn't agree with me. But look, it doesn't entirely surprise. This is a marathon, not a sprint. For years and years and years, you've had these there's misinformation, these deeply misleading facts put about by people like Nigel Farage, unchallenged. Of course, I'm not going to be able to reverse that in 1 hour, but I hugely enjoyed it. And the fact that I was able to speak directly to people, whether they agreed with me or not, and by the way, I fully anticipate there are plenty of people who would disagree with me before the debate, during the debate and after the debate, but at least I can put the other side of the story, which has gone missing for so very long. I'm just not prepared, simply because it might not be popular with some people, to keep quiet any longer, given that I think there is so much at stake. There are millions of jobs at stake. There's the safety of our streets at stake. And so, look, as I say, a marathon, not a sprint. The first debate was had. I thought, by the way, Nick, you did a great job in making sure the contestants kept the contest fairly clean and straightforward. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right, Mr. Clegg, thank you for that. Let's move to the next call.
Danny in Ealing. Hello, Danny.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Morning.
What is the Liberal Democrats' take on the new Sharia law that may be introduced for making the wills compliant to Sharia law?
Just to make sure the listeners heard that, Danny, stay on the line. What is, Mr. Clegg, your view on the idea of British solicitors drafting Sharia-compliant wills as part of English law? Mr. Clegg.
There's going to be no change in English law as such, but of course wills are matters for people to draw up themselves. But there's no question of us changing legislation, because the law needs to apply evenly to everybody, including when it comes to how you draw up wills. But of course, what you put in your will and whether you choose to make your own will Sharia compliant, if you're of the Muslim faith, that is in a sense up to you. But we're not changing the law as a government or as a parliament, because I think it's really important that the law is, if you like, neutral and applied to everybody, regardless of their faith or their community.
Quick response, Danny.
Well, I think introduction of Sharia law is not compatible with the secular democracy that we live in. And it would affect the freedom of thought, freedom of women, freedom of the same-sex marriages and everything else. This could be a snowball that's going downhill, which will collect momentum, and soon enough, because the elections are around the corner, you will have a section of the community lobbying the ministers and their councillors in order for this to be accepted. And once accepted, it is going to be very difficult to take it out of the British system.
Let's hear lastly Mr. Clegg on this.
Well, no, I've made very clear to Danny that's not what is happening. So I hear what Danny's concerns, and I also share the concern as an old-fashioned liberal. The law should be there, apply to everybody in the same way. Everyone should be equal before the law. We shouldn't be creating carve-outs or exceptions to this community or to that community. Your own people's own faith is something that in a sense the government shouldn't in any way be trying to second guess. How people draw up their wills is a matter for them, but the way in which the law is drafted by Parliament shouldn't be, and I completely agree with Danny, shouldn't be drafted to make exceptions for this community or that community, because the moment you do that, of course, the very concept of law, that everyone is equal before the law, is eroded, and that is a bad thing.
We move on. Thanks, Danny. Move on to the next call, Mr. Clegg.
Peter in Slough. Hello, Peter.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Morning.
I retired fairly recently on a comfortable pension. However, the house that I bought for my family 20 years ago for £600,000 is probably now worth about £2 million. Now, if I have to pay a 1% duty or tax, a mansion tax on that property, that will probably absorb between a third and a half of my pension, and I would therefore have to sell the house. Do you think that's fair?
Well, of course, if your property is worth £2 million, you won't pay anything. Not under our plans, not a single penny, because we're not saying.
Well, the way property prices are going up, we're probably worth £2.5 million by the time we finish this conversation. But go ahead.
But so under the plans that we've got for what's been dubbed the mansion tax, the taxation for very high value properties, you wouldn't pay anything at £2 million. You'd only pay 1% of the value over £2 million. Not even anything. So anything up to £2 million is entirely free of that. But can I just say to you, Peter? At the moment, of course, people pay taxes on the value of their properties. It's called council tax. The odd thing about our council tax system is that someone can be living in a family home, I don't know, in Lewisham, and they can be paying the same council tax as an oligarch can be paying on a £5 million palace in the middle of London, because in a sense you have these different bands up to roughly £700,000, and then that's it. And all we're saying, and I think most people would accept that's right, is that it cannot be fair that a family living in a family home in Lewisham is paying the same council tax as someone who's living in a £5 million palace in the middle of Kensington. And so what we're saying, in effect, is that surely we should address that anomaly in the council tax system and make sure that very high value properties are at least reflected in the way which we pay taxes on properties, just as much as lower value properties are.
Quick response from you, Peter.
Yes, I'm delighted to hear your answer to the question, because the popular belief is that the tax will be paid on the total value of the property and not the excess above £2 million.
It's the excess above £2 million.
And if you want people to vote for you, it's very important you get that message out.
Well, I think he has, Peter. Thank you. I think, in fairness, I have to say, the Deputy Prime Minister definitely nailed that one, so thank you for your call. I have to turn to some emails, if I could, Mr. Clegg.
Yes.
Kate in Norfolk. You definitely won last night, congratulations, but when it comes to debates for the general election, Who are you going to put in the Chancellor's debate alongside Ed Balls and George Osborne? Will it be Danny Alexander or Vince Cable, asks Kate.
Well, we'll obviously have to decide on that, but of course Danny Alexander is the Liberal Democrat Treasury Minister. He has presided as Chief Secretary of Treasury over probably the biggest transformation of public finances in a generation. At the same time, of course, Vince is an outstanding Secretary of State dealing with business issues. So I'll get back to Kate on that. But she makes a wider point, by the way.
So who's going to be? Sorry, I'm confused. So it will be Danny.
No, I have not yet decided, and we'll decide that nearer the time. But one point that Kate
what will
makes,
make the decision for you? How will you make that decision, Mr. Clegg?
Well, I'll make that decision, then we'll talk about it on the programme nearer the time. But
what will inform you to make the decision? How will Vince pip Danny or Danny pip Vince?
Look, we're all grown-ups. We'll talk about it with each other, but we'll decide near the time. But the point Kate makes is an interesting one, which is that she's already looking forward to those debates at the general election time. And I do think that actually last night, regardless of whether you think Nigel Farage did better than I, or vice versa, or whether you think that we should or shouldn't stay in the European Union, I actually think what it showed was the value of just having politicians with different points of view battling it out in front of people, so people can make up their own minds. And both Ed Miliband and I have now said that we would sign up to the way in which the leaders' debates were held at the last general election. The Conservatives are dragging their feet. I really don't think they should do that for much longer, because people want to have these debates. They want to hear directly from people. They want to hear the differences. They want to be able to compare and contrast. And I think it, frankly, is pretty odd that both David Cameron and Ed Miliband have chosen not to debate this major issue of whether we should be in or out of the European Union. But at least in the run-up to the next general election, I hope they'll both find a bit more guts to actually step up to the plate and have a proper public debate.
What has the Prime Minister said to you about this debate, either today or before it?
We haven't talked about it much, because at the end of the day...
Must have talked about it a bit, something like this. He did. Gosh, you two chaps, you're always in the Rose Garden getting on in a famous fashion. He must have said something.
Is that the way you think it works, Nick? Oh, dear.
He must have said something. He must have said, Nick, have you got to start raving mad?
The naivety of youth, Nick. Right? I think that's the way it works.
I bless you.
He knows my view, which is I think the debates were a success last time. I think people liked to be able to make up their own minds by hearing what the different party leaders think and about various issues. I think people, again, regardless of their views about who was up, who was down, who was right, who was wrong, they liked to see that debate yesterday.
But did he think you were bonkers for doing it?
I honestly, it was my decision, and it's not really for David Cameron to sort of second guess what I think. So, but I do think that I think it's extraordinary that he and Ed Miliband basically don't deign to debate the European issue when it's clearly an important one, which lots of people, and I think the debate last night showed that, lots of people are really engaged in, and it's perhaps a bit of a sign of the times that the two largest parties in British politics, the Labour and the Conservative parties, are now so sort of tied up in their own knots on Europe, they're not even prepared to talk in clear, unambiguous terms about what they believe on this all-important issue.
It's called Clegg, so we go to the next caller. Who is it, Mr. Clegg?
Christian in South Croydon. Hello, Christian.
Hi. Morning,
Hello.
Mr. Clegg. My question is, I would take it that you regard yourself as a prudent politician, and as such, if you want Britain to join Europe, why aren't you pushing for a referendum? And let me just make this point: if you're running a business, multi-million-dollar business, surely you would not join up or link up with any other company without knowing what the terms and conditions are of the contract. And I think you, more than Mr. Farage, should be pushing for a referendum. Why aren't you pushing for a referendum?
All right, Christian, thank you.
Christian, two points, Christian. Firstly, of course, we are part of Europe, and we have been part of the European community and the European Union since the early 1970s. So it's not a question about whether we join it or not. We have been part of it now for a very long time. The second question then is, on what basis do you have a referendum? Because it's not about whether you join or not. We've been part of the European community and now the European Union since the early 1970s. And my answer is, which is something that we've now guaranteed in law, is that you, Christian, and indeed anybody else who's listening today, will get a say in a referendum the next time you are being asked to give up powers to the European Union because the rules of the European Union are going to change. And by the way, the rules of the European Union, they change very regularly. And that's been my view for years and years and years and years. And that's why, and Nick Ferrari raised this last night, back in 2008, I was campaigning for a referendum because at that time we were discussing how we ratify a new set of rules. It was called the Lisbon Treaty at the time. And I felt then, and I still feel now, that when we're asked to ratify these new rules, when new things are asked of us as a country, that shouldn't happen over your head, Christian. It should be through a referendum. So look, we're part of it already. So it's not a question about having a referendum on that issue, but it is a question of having a referendum, the next time the rules change and new things are asked of us as a country.
Christian, thank you. The next call, Deputy Prime Minister.
Lee in Bexley Heath. Hello, Lee.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning, Nick.
Morning, Lee.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the teacher strike. Well, I phoned up yesterday, actually spoke to you for a bit, Nick, and regarding supporting the teachers. The question I want to put to you, Mr. Clegg, is why do you think it's all right to continually pile more work on the people without extra pay and then to cut their pension? Why do you think that would be all right and that they'd say, yeah, that's all right, we don't mind, kind of a thing?
Well, look, I think the main, if you just listen to the National Union of Teachers, the main objection they have is to a change that we're introducing, which allows head teachers to basically reward particularly good teachers with a bit of extra pay, whilst making sure that, of course, other teachers are not penalised and they've got their pay bands and they go up in their pay bands. But if they're at the top of their pay bands and they're very good teachers, the head teacher can reward them a bit of extra. And I think many people, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, accept that teaching is such an important thing. How good teachers are in the classroom, that giving the head teachers that flexibility, which, by the way, they might not want to take up. Some head teachers might not want to take it up, but is nonetheless a reasonable thing to do. And that's what we have sought to do. And, OK, the National Union of Teachers don't agree with that, but I think many, many parents actually think that saying that head teachers should have the freedom to reward good teachers is a reasonable step to take.
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
Because my wife works in the school as a teaching assistant. Now, when she started 10 years ago, her job was do a bit like help with a bit of reading, clean the paint pots out. She works in a primary school. She now has to take kids out. She's acting like a teacher. She don't get a dinner break. She has to work through it because there just ain't enough time. And now she's starting to bring stuff home because there ain't enough time to do it in school. She's on 12 grand a year. She ain't had a pay rise in 5 years. So how do you think that's fair? And a classic example, Nick, you done an extra show last night, didn't you?
Me, I did. Yes, this Nick. Yes, yeah.
Did you get paid for that?
You better believe it.
So you don't work for nothing, do you?
You're right, sir.
But you expect teachers
back to the deputy prime minister now. Yep.
Well,
but you expect the teachers and the teaching assistants to work for nothing, take all this extra work on, and get nothing in return, and then you wonder why they strike.
Sure,
really?
Lee.
Mr. Clegg.
Yeah, Lee. I mean, look, I am a huge admirer and fan of our teachers across the country. They do, on the whole, not only an extremely good job, but an unbelievably important one.
Not quite answering it, Mr. Clegg.
No. Let me explain.
Okay,
now, Lee, you talked about your wife, who's working incredibly hard, working very long hours on £12,000. That is not a great deal of money. By the way, she will at least, though, benefit from the fact that she won't have to pay any tax on the first £10,500 that she earns as of next April, because of the kind of things that I've been introducing in government. But here's the point, Lee. What this disputed about is not are teachers working hard or not. I think everybody recognises that teachers work extraordinarily hard and do, on the whole, an exceptionally good job. All we're saying is that head teachers should have the freedom, where they want, to reward those teachers who they think are doing an especially good job.
Let's move to another question. Lee, thank you, on the emails. This one comes in from Jeremy in Hertfordshire. Is it right that girls and women can stock up on the morning after pill under new NHS guidance? I think actually it's National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence guidance, but the point is there anyway. Stocking up on the morning after pill. Mr. Clegg.
I have to say to you, I am absolutely appalled, and in fact really quite angry on behalf of many women across the country about this suggestion that giving a woman the right to buy a morning after pill will somehow automatically lead to more promiscuous behaviour. I think it's demeaning. I think it's patronising. I think it's sexist. You know, it's quite astonishing. You know, women don't take the morning after pill lightly. It's not just something you casually do. But to say to a woman she cannot have the right, in case she has unprotected sex, and just in case, to have the morning after pill available to her, and to say, oh no, you can't possibly have that right because we, whoever's we, the government, society, or whichever newspaper columnist is pontificating about this, think you'll suddenly become terribly promiscuous, I think is an absolute insult to women across the country.
Have you told Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, this? Because he's rather worried about it.
Well, I haven't spoken to him about it, but I fundamentally disagree with anyone who says...
Well, he's expressed
concern. By the way,
be aware of this, Mr. Clegg.
Well, I believe the experts who have quite clearly said that providing the morning after pill, and indeed other forms of contraception, the evidence is very, very clear. It doesn't lead to more promiscuous behaviour. It does, however, help prevent unwanted pregnancies. But I just think that you know, this is lifting a lid on a really fundamental difference in attitude towards women. Women shouldn't be told, we're not going to give you the freedom to buy something from a chemist because you think you might need it, because otherwise we don't trust how you will behave sexually. I mean, it's just a sort of Victorian, worse than that. It's a sort of medieval approach to women, and that's why I am as angry as I am on behalf of women. That is the attitude that is now being reflected in a lot of the debate on this issue this morning.
Healthy debate to come then with Mr. Hunt, I would suggest, Mr. Clegg.
Well, I can't have made my views more clear.
You couldn't. Just lastly on this, are you aware that the guidance also says that girls under 16 can avail themselves of these pills? Your reaction to that?
Well, and there's a long-standing issue about the point at which doctors and other medical professionals, have got to encourage 16-year-olds, and of course anyone younger than that, to speak to their parents.
Yes.
And that's what they must do, wherever they possibly can. But at the end of the day, when you're faced with the reality of a teenager who is in trouble, you as a medical expert want to help them, right? And I think for us to sort of decree that they can or they can't help someone, at the end of the day, that's not going to alter the fact that 16-year-old is in trouble.
Under 16-year-old, Mr. Clegg, I have to repeat, under 16. You're happy with that?
I do not want to see teenage. I don't want to see anybody, if at all possible, suffer unwanted pregnancies. I don't want to see the very high rates we've had in the past in this country of unwanted pregnancies for very young individuals. But the way to deal with it, the way to deal with that is to make sure that we go with the evidence, and the evidence is very clear, is that if you provide people with information, with education, if you empower them with that information, if you make contraception available to them on a responsible basis, that's the way that we stop unwanted pregnancy, not by resorting to really outdated attitudes towards women.
All right. We've time for one more question, Deputy Prime Minister.
Ron in Hazelmere. Hello, Ron.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg. Mr. Clegg, I've got to be honest, I'm not a fan of yours.
Oh dear.
And after watching last night's programme and listening to you this morning, it's just reinforced my perception of
Can
you.
I move you to a question? I mean, he's got a thick skin.
That's a good start, Ron.
Right. Two quick questions, if that's all right with you. Firstly, Mr. Farage is saying that 29 million Romanians and Bulgarians have the right to come to Britain, not that they will, as you were trying to work out this morning. Please respect the intelligence of the British public. That's number one. Number two, last night you said, as far as you're concerned, you aren't going to let it happen. You are not going to let Mr. Farage. Well, actually, Mr. Farage speaks for a lot of British people. You are not going to let it happen. How are you not going to let the will of the British people happen?
Let what happen?
When
you say not happen, do you mean the referendum, Ron?
Nick, last night, it's all the way through the programme. Mr. Clegg was saying about Mr. Farage, what Mr. Farage wants.
Taking Britain out. I'm sorry, it's only for time reasons, Ron. Excuse me. Taking Britain out of Europe. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Clegg.
Well, I clearly don't agree with you, Ron. I disagree with you as strongly as you disagree with me. I don't think taking us out of the world's largest economy would be good for the millions of jobs that are linked to our position in the single market. I don't think it would help us pursue criminals who cross borders. I don't think it would help us deal with climate change. I think it would make us less relevant in the world, more isolated. Of course, I disagree with you. I don't think that's why we had the debate. I think we should remain in, so that's no surprise. On the first issue, listen, you talk about the fact. You heard it for yourself. Nigel Farage said, for instance, on this claim that I've heard cited over and over again, unchallenged for years, that 75% of our laws are made in Europe. And when asked by Nick Ferrari, where did you get that fact? He said, well, basically, I came up with it. And I was then able to say, no, the facts, as proved by the House of Commons, is not 75%, 7%. So look, I know it was quite a fact-heavy debate, but it's quite important because I think so many misleading facts have been bandied about, and I think it's right to try and get the facts. And then, Ron, you and I can disagree, but at least we can disagree on the basis of the facts rather than on the basis of a lot of the myths and misinformed facts which have been peddled for a very long time.
And a final email, Ted in Sidcup. Mr. Clegg, I understand that you and your boys are Arsenal fans. So am I. Do you agree Wenger must go?
Oh, Ted, I'm sighing with sorrow. The game on Saturday was I think for any Arsenal fan was heartbreaking to watch. Look, I remain an Arsene Wenger fan.
That's him done for then. Sorry, do go on.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, do go on. I don't know how that came out.
We're missing some of our most creative attacking players at the moment, and I just think it's important that we stick with the manager because he's had a great season so far. It's gone a bit wonky recently, but I actually think we can finish off the season really strongly.
Thank you again for last night. Thank you again for today. I look forward to seeing you again. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg with Call Clegg. Thank you for that. You're listening to LBC.
Last night, Nick Clegg and Nigel Farage went head-to-head in the LBC Leaders Debate.
This is a leaflet that Nigel Farage's party distributed in the recent